Hello, fermented folks and bleeders of orange and black, and welcome to another fermented fiction and we bleed orange and black collab on our panel series about the Bram Stoker Award categories. This topic today is poetry. So we are looking at superior achievement in poetry with a great panel of award nominated and award winning poets. They are all going to introduce themselves because they can do that much better than we can. And I'm going to be mostly in producer mode for this particular episode because we've brought on my business partner in BTRS Publishing, Tamara Kaye Sellman, who herself is an award nominated poet and a widely published one as well. So she's going to be moderating this panel for us because she's much more intelligent in the subject of poetry than I will ever be. So thank you everybody so much for coming out. If you don't already know, I'm Clay Vermolum. I am one of the hosts of Fermented Fiction, and we're co-sponsoring this podcast with my good friend and collaborator, Jeff C. Carter. Jeff, can you tell the good people who you are real quick, and then we'll introduce our panelists and our moderator.
My name's Jeff C. Carter. I'm the host of We Bleed Orange and Black, the podcast for Halloween and horror lovers, where we interview creators, discuss our favorite folklore, and share original spooky stories. Tamara, let's kick this off.
All right. Hey, thanks, Clay, and thanks, Jeff. This is going to be fun. I'm going to be the moderator for this discussion. I'm Tamara Kaye Sellman. Before we start, I would like to ask each of our panelists to briefly introduce themselves. And I will start with Corinne Phillips. Tell us about yourself.
Well, my name is Corinne Phillips, and I'm a writer and poet and artist and an autumn person, and that's about it.
How about you, Tiffany?
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me. My name is Tiffany, and I am the author of How Lovely to Be a Woman, Stories and Poems, and the co-host of the Horror in the Margins podcast.
Fantastic. And Jamal, tell us about yourself.
Hey everyone, my name is Jamal Hodge. I am I'm a filmmaker, I'm a writer and a poet, and I'm a Bram Stoker nominee for this fine book that I co-wrote with Linda Addison called Everything Endless. So really excited. It's my second nomination, and I'm just, happy to be a part of Black speculative poetry.
Welcome, everybody. Again, I am Tamara Kaye Sellman. I'm the author of the hybrid poetry creative nonfiction collection Intention Tremor, which is actually more about chronic illness, but that's its own kind of body horror. So you could make a case for that. But as Clay mentioned, I'm co-host for the Beneath the Rain Shadow podcast and co-author with Clay Vermolum of Rain Shadows Dark Tales from Washington State. I'm also a 4-time Pushcart nominee in the poetry category. I have another short story collection called Cul-de-sac Stories and 2 poetry films, which I've written and produced, very short ones called Look Up and Lunatic. So I imagine that not everyone has read the books nominated for the Stoker 2026 Award for Superior Achievement in Poetry. I certainly haven't. So if you'll indulge me, I'd like to honor each of these nominees with a brief description first, and then we can jump into questions, okay? The first one is Allegories of Beauty and Violence, a collection of Gothic romance poems from Marianne C. Raguso, PhD, with Analyze This Press. The second is Everything Endless with Linda D. Addison and our very own Jamal Hodge from Raw Dog Screaming Press. The third is The Haunting by Kate Peebles of the Tupelo Press. Fourth is The Uterus is Impossible Forest. What a great title. Shannon Kurds, Raw Dog Screaming Press. And finally, Songs of Enough and Inferno All My Own by Maxwell Gold with Hippocampus Press. So congratulations to all the nominees, including you here, Jamal.
Hey.
So let's get to today's questions. I am an unintentional horror poet. I lean more into the speculative by default. And I never really purposefully set out to write horror-centered poems. I only know that they're horror afterward, after I've looked at them a million times and realized, oh, that's a horror poem. So with these poets and these collections, there's certainly a purpose to writing in the horror space. So my question is, what are the unique challenges and benefits of writing poetry in this space? And we're going to go ahead and start with the same order. So Corinne, what do you think? What are the unique challenges and benefits of writing poetry in the horror space?
Oh gosh. Challenges. It's I think it's challenging in horror. I feel like you have to be really vulnerable, and it's not just, a lot of poetry, I think, has to, especially classical poetry, it'll deal in like pastoral elements or settings and joyful things, love. And then horror is more like psychological. And you have to kind of like open yourself up and share the darkest corners of your mind. And that's intimidating. I think that's the challenge to be able to write that down and share it with people.
That's a great point. I think that's a great answer. So you just need a little warm up. That's all.
I need a warm up, yeah, for
We all do. We all do. So Tiffany, what do you think? Same question. Do you want me to
Um,
repeat it?
oh no, I got it.
You got it. Okay.
Yeah, I think one of the unique challenges is just that poetry in general has a bad rap, right? In terms of what people are going to pick up, or you say the words horror poetry together, and people are like, "What is that? I don't even know what that is." I've gone to a couple of poetry readings, and I'm the one out there trying to evangelize and say, "Hey, you can get creepy with all this stuff. Like, look at what you can do with this." Um, because I went to school and took poetry classes, but we never read anything that was horrifying. Like, there was never any horror poetry on the syllabus. Like, you kinda have to find it yourself. So I think that there's that. Like, there's a discoverability and just people not knowing about it. And I really struggled in my collection of whether I wanted to put poetry in there. But funny enough, sometimes I'll talk to readers and they go, "Oh, this is what I really connected with," which is so interesting to me because I almost censored myself and didn't do it. So I think that that's one of the gratifying pieces of it. So I think that's one of the benefits. I think that there is an appetite out there. People just don't know that they have it until they actually discover it. And I also think that horror, as much as we talk about dread and scares and that sort of thing, it's all deeply connected to emotion, which is the main fuel for poetry, right? Like we're really tapping into whether it's fear, dread, some sort of desire, survival, anything like that. Like those are all base emotions that actually are really rich material for poetry. So I feel like we're kind of already writing it and you just have to go, "Oh no, I am a poet. Like let's just put that down."
Mm.
So I think some of it is that.
That's a great answer. Thank you. And Jamal, what do you think? What is the challenge for you?
So for me, the way I look at it is that I don't write horror poetry. I just write poetry. It's just that life without hope is the ultimate horror story. Life, when taken literally or when drifting through life, is the ultimate horror story. And I think trying to make people recognize that by sharing the most vulnerable parts of yourself, which is also the most universal parts of yourself, because the things that are the most personal or the most universal, it kind of lets people first confront the horrors of how they've been drifting through life, but then that connection, that empathy, that pain also connects them to their compassion, their purpose, and their courage. So fundamentally, the hardest thing for me about writing this sort of poetry, if you want to call it a different form, I don't think it is having the personal courage to be vulnerable enough to bleed the truth onto the page.
Mm,
That's how I would say it.
nicely said. I agree. The vulnerability is definitely um, the gateway, right, to exploring all of those the grief and anxiety, depression, all the things that
And it's hard to
we.
express those things too. It's very different to express those. It's hard for everybody to express those things. But as a man, it's even more difficult for the average man to express those things. You know what I'm saying? To be that publicly vulnerable on a certain level like that, it's difficult. But I feel like it's something that's missing from a lot of things. Is that perspective is missing, that internal exploration is missing. So I think we need more, you know, dudes in the modern era also to step up and to rip their chests open and to be vulnerable on the page to, to show more of their like unfiltered humanity. I think that's important.
Mm. Oh, I love that. I love that because I love all of these answers because they steer away from maybe what is the cliche of horror poetry. And that's just this idea that the only people who write poets are these like gothic teenagers who are, hanging out smoking clove cigarettes, in the woods somewhere and writing poetry about their pain. And I mean, not I love the idea that teenagers would be writing poetry about their pain. I certainly did it myself. But I think there is this cliched idea of what a horror poem or a gothic poem is, and what you all have described as something just way more universal and relatable to the collective. So I love that. Thank you all for your answers for that.
If y'all got any more of those clove cigarettes, hit me up. Stoker Con.
Oh my god. Oh goodness, that was a blast from my past. So
You guys
speaking
smoke
of
clove
God,
cigarettes?
what's that?
You smoke clove cigarettes? Did you
Oh,
used to
we all
smoke clove
did.
cigarettes? Yeah, I
Yeah,
just
we all
smoke
did.
regular ones.
Who
And
among
then
It was
us
back in the
I
80s.
hasn't tasted the sweet,
yeah,
sticky scent of a
Yeah,
clove?
no.
cigarillos and all those weird things. Yeah.
That's
I
interesting.
mean,
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah,
Jamal's room is full of smoke, so I think
yeah.
he might have been going through a
Oh,
pack of cloves right before we started.
You can see it, right?
Yeah.
He
speaking
was getting in the mood.
speaking of a cliched poetry kind of atmosphere, right? We should all just be lighting up
The
right
burning
now.
incense.
Yes.
So, speaking of goths, it seems to me that horror literature in general and gothic literature in particular are both having a moment right now, which is yay. I love it. Of course, you all love it, I'm sure. So, my question is, what do you think are the key factors that make a work of poetry, of horror poetry in particular, stand out in this present genre climate where people are looking and seeking out dark lyric in relation to the contemporary readership we have right now, these readers who are seeking out these kinds of books? What are some key factors? What is the allure of horror literature in general and gothic literature in particular?
Hmm.
And let's start with Jamal this time.
Oh, well, I feel like like what's the benefit of poetry in general, right? It's kind of like it's a way of the conscious mind to have a conversation with the subconscious mind, and to be an observer of that, I think helps other people have the same conversations within themselves. I think in dark times, like in the times we're living in now, under certain regimes, I think that in dark times like this, a lot of times it's important where people will have a place where they can express how they're actually feeling. Because a lot of the times, how we're actually feeling is unknown even to ourselves. And we just have these dark emotions, this anger, this pain, this sense of being lost, this sense of dread, of accumulating dread, financial dread, physical, emotional, spiritual dread. I think the people want to see that reflected by a place where they're not being judged, but they can actually just ingest all of that, but with somebody who's kind of worked it out and put it into a structure that they can relate to. And they could be like, oh, yeah, I see myself in this. I feel that in myself. I think it's like a form of therapy, for lack of a better, of being seen, like looking into a mirror and a reflection. I think that puts people at ease. It has the opposite effect. It's like people read dark things to find the light within things, if that makes any sense.
It totally does to me as someone who has chronic illness, and my poetry book is about the 5 years following that diagnosis. And there is this like need I learned as a poet writing about these realities that aren't really discussed publicly, that people need to read them either as those who are also suffering in some way or their loved ones. They want to know and understand what it is to live inside a body that's not working for you like it should, and the body horror again that comes with that. And I found that when you write those kinds of poems, they create a safe environment to explore that vulnerability, the pain, And it's really interesting. It's a safer space really than social media, which is where everyone heads, right? But as
Mhm.
soon as you put things out in social media, man, the haters come out there too. And you could be talking very vulnerably about your own experience, whatever that might be, and have people come in and just try to, you know, drive a stake through your heart just for being out there. So I love this idea that writing horror poetry creates a safe space in this time, as Jamal, you said, of accumulated dread, because it's collective, right? It's not just one person or that person down there. It's all of us. We're in this moment. So I love that
Could I get
poetry
that?
is this.
Could I just I just would
Yeah,
you made a really great point about you writing about this personal experience about the body failing and how people needed to read that. I think that people really need to read those things. That's the power of like the things being, the things that you expose that are so personal to yourself, how they really are universal to people because fundamentally, not to the extreme, maybe not so obvious, but fundamentally, all of our bodies will betray us at some point in our lives.
yeah, yeah,
And we all kind of know it in our back and in our minds, no matter how much we take care of it, eventually we're going to decay and die. That's the
yeah,
process of life.
yeah,
So you writing about that and coming back from that is to be almost like a messenger through this written word. It's like it gives us hope to confront the inevitable, and I think that's
yeah, yeah.
what hard poetry does.
Yeah, and it's safe, and you can write it you could read it privately, you can take it into another room and just, it could come to you in a form of a zine even, and you could just read these words and they could, at least advocate for something that you're feeling. In the case of this collective dread that we're talking about, we're all feeling it, but we don't necessarily know how to articulate it, or we don't know how everyone else is feeling. I mean, I think poetry is a great way to articulate those things in creative, beautiful ways that allow us to explore beyond that. So I loved all that you just said about that. So I'd like to move this to Tiffany. What do you think, given the times, given
Yeah.
these times, I mean, you'd already mentioned, what is horror poetry, but what makes it stand out for this pleasant or present, genre climate pleasant, it's not pleasant,
It's not
pre
pleasant.
not at all, present genre climate, where horror and gothic, ideas are being sought out.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really just going to agree with a lot of what you just said there, both you and Jamal, because I do think that a lot of art is a product of the times that we're living through, right? And I feel like there is a big surplus of just horror across everything, right? Because we're all trying to process all of this collectively, and incredible art comes out of really, really difficult times. As Jamal mentioned, sometimes it's personal therapy, right? Or it's a connection point to other people. So I think that horror poetry certainly has a place right now too, because again, it's giving that space of being able to relate to someone else's experience. Or maybe someone reads something and it means something different to them, but it's exactly what they needed at that time. I've said it a couple of different times in interviews and on our own podcast where it's kind of like once you put work out into the world, yes, it was from you and maybe you bled on the page, but it kind of no longer belongs to you. It belongs to the reader as well. And it's this beautiful shared experience that you can have that can turn into something completely different and unintended. And I think that that is some of the power of it. Um, I also think that maybe Gothicism is having a bit of a moment too, because it's not entirely grounded in some of our contemporary. Like there's a touch of fantasy sometimes
Mhm.
um, in Gothic work that I feel like can also feel like a small bit of escapism,
Yeah.
even if it's a little bit dreadful, but it's a little bit of escapism. Like maybe we can put a little bit of distance between where we are right now and
Yeah.
another world, you know? Um, but I think that there's also a bit of like a romantic lean to that in some respects too. And I think that people are craving that. Again, turning something really horrific into something beautiful. Like there's something very magnetic about that. So I think that there may be something there. Um,
Mm,
it just a number of different ways of whether it's escapism or dealing with our everyday realities or finding a connection point with other people. I think
mm,
that poetry in general is just such an excellent way to do that.
mm. That's great. And that's so funny because I have found myself feeling quite nostalgic for things like Jane Eyre. Which is I mean, Jane
Yeah.
Eyre is not happy, it's dark and brooding, and there's a crazy lady in the attic, and, that's obviously it's fiction, but just that kind of vibe of just and it is an escape because there's no cell phones, there's no social media, there's no internet, it's just slow, slow living and
Mm.
people working things out, so that's a really good point, I never really thought of it that way, but how interesting to be nostalgic for the dark times. Like, that's a better time to be. That's crazy, so, yeah, good point. Corinne, what do you think, about the moment that horror is in right now? I mean, the Pulitzer Prize went to a horror author of fiction, so that's also interesting to me. It's like and then we're looking at the Academy Awards with horror
So,
films being nominated.
I agree with everyone that like what they just said, but I think that poetry and horror is definitely like a sign of the times. And I really love classical poetry. I love John Keats. So I'll go back and I'll read Keats's letters or his sonnets, and they're all very there's a lot of that's the thing, we're craving these things, but someone takes it and turns it into absolute nonsense, I feel. So,
Mhm.
I wonder what we're actually doing here
yeah,
with
that's
our
not
art.
Are we What's
If
happening?
we're still trying, if we take like the substance out of certain things and turn them into to fit with our modern times, but then we're also missing something from it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I
Like,
do. I totally know what you mean. And,
yeah,
it makes me think about all of those like gothic novels that were turned into, I can't think of now, but Pride and Prejudice,
Pride and Prejudice.
but the horror version of it
Oh, Pride and
with
Prejudice
Oh,
and
the zombies
Zombies or
one?
something
and
like that. Yeah.
zombies. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
Pride
And so, I
and
mean,
Zombies. Yeah.
to me, that has more substance than what some of the stuff that's coming out. So
Right.
it's interesting.
Right.
And there's a whole series of those. There's more than one. So, it's kind of funny that they're just taking a full on horror then.
That's
Um,
the thing. Yeah. I don't know if it's just for if we're craving that as just an aesthetic thing or if we're actually craving those stories. Like Wuthering Heights is a miserable, dreadful story, but we got this very
yeah.
crazy version of it now. So
Yeah,
I never know how to feel.
that's a really
Something
the word aesthetic. I think the idea of the aesthetic being more important than the actual substance is really a worthwhile conversation to have
Mhm.
because
yeah.
I feel like so much of our media right now is kind of going that route. And when it comes to poetry, you just can't do that. I mean, because it's a
Right.
conversation, really. It has to be. It's not just words on a page that are just set a certain way and it's pretty. There's layers of meaning and you're excavating something when you write a poetry and even when you read a poetry. So um I think that's interesting. And it leads to things like, it's witchcore or cottage or whatever, these different kinds of vibes, romanticy, you're fitting an aesthetic, but are you really giving us anything that's meaningful and,
it's slop.
um
It's slop.
Right.
Yeah,
What are
it's
you
just
getting
yeah,
out?
exactly, exactly,
yeah,
exactly.
it's just a cash grab slop. That's what it all is.
Uh,
Yeah.
There's no depth to it. It's just like, oh, this is
no.
pretty cool. We'll put some pretty. I work in that industry, so
Oh,
That makes me
yeah.
sad though, because then if we're not like feeding our souls anymore, we're just, oh, here you go. This looks cool. Let's do this.
I mean,
It's
Right.
not really
And
giving you anything. It's not making you feel anything.
In terms of what poetry is, what it
yeah,
does, how it's different from other forms of prose, or even things like film that Tamara and Jamal produce, film is received directly. Is there something unique to poetry?
yeah, of course, yeah.
mm,
I mean,
Definitely.
I mean, if somebody else wanted to say, because I'm yapping a lot, but I
It's
definitely
all
have.
good.
Yeah.
I feel like for me, poetry demands that you bring yourself to it,
Mm,
the reader. So poetry or good poetry is always leads to some sort of revelation.
Mm,
Like it has a revelation embedded in it emotionally, maybe perspective wise, but something in yourself. It's almost like I think fundamentally the difference in poetry is that it's such an intimate, it's like an iceberg, right? You look on top of the
mm,
surface of reality or life, and you have all these different points, and this is sea full of icebergs. But once you go under the surface, the deeper you go, the wider the icebergs come out, and then you realize they're all at the bottom are connected to a singular block of ice. And it's kind of like that's what poetry I think kind of does that no other form does. It's like by me being so intimate or other people being so intimate, all these poets and put it on the page, they also connect to something collective in all of us that we feel when we come to the page in a way that can't be defined clearly with words because it's feelings and consciousness. So it's beyond words. And I feel like
mhm,
the form where your subconscious mind and the reader's subconscious mind can have a conversation in a way that no other
mm.
form can. So that's what I think.
I like that because poetry is filled with things like metaphor and symbolism and and you're expected to go and mine those ideas because the receiving end of that, the reader or the listener, if it's being formed, they're bringing whatever they can to that conversation, right? And so that's why you go through those use the universal, the mythos, the all these things that we all in ourselves understand about the world, even if we can't always articulate them, but we can, suss them out as images or sounds or sensory or whatever through a poem, a poetry experience, an exchange between a poet and a reader, and really dig into that collective feeling that we are all struggling to articulate. And I don't, as Jeff said, a film does have however many sets of eyes and minds at work to put that together, and so you've got a filter. Um,
It's like a roller coaster. It's like we
yeah.
want you to feel what we want you to feel when we want you to feel it, and we design it like a
Oh,
roller
yeah. Oh,
film.
yeah.
The film is
Oh, yeah.
very manipulative more than like what you would do in a poem.
hmm.
Yeah.
Um,
mhm.
Yeah.
and it's so interactive where it's like it's formless. It has a form, but it's also formless because everybody who takes it on evolves it, or the reader evolves the message as well with their own experience.
It's absolutely true, I think. What do you guys think? What do you think, Tiffany?
Yeah, I
What
think one thing that's really unique about poetry is that it demands your attention in a different way. And I think that
Mm,
this is, building a little bit on what we've been saying here, but it is an art form where we are constantly inundated with things where they're like, okay, keep going, like watch the next episode. I'm just going to build this so that you never take a break, right? Like it's just constant, constant, constant
yeah.
content. But poetry really demands that you slow down or that you follow whatever pace the author creates, which I think is really interesting too, right? You can do so much with cadence, you can do so much with word selection that helps to guide a reader through, or even if you're listening to it, the same sort of thing. It's just a different experience. Um, and I think that that is something that's super unique right now in a place where we're just trying to so much media is just rush, rush, rush. And I think for poetry, you really do have to pause and reflect, and go back and reread. And I'll read a collection and get to the end of a poem and have to sit there and kind of take a break for a few minutes
Yeah.
before you go on to something else, which I think is different than if I was reading an anthology or, any other book where like the end of a chapter is going to be a cliffhanger. It's trying to get me to turn the page. Whereas poetry is kind of like, no, sit with this for a second.
Mhm.
Like, let's have that
Mm,
conversation.
Yeah.
Um,
yeah.
so I think that's really unique for this
Mm.
particular art form.
Mhm.
Yeah, that you make great points. I mean, poems are really moments.
Hmm.
Even if they
Yeah.
have stories attached to them and you build through them, there is a moment in that, and it's usually a discovery or as
Hmm.
Jamal points out, something that we're learning anew, as a human being. So, what do you think, Corinne? Um,
Yeah.
I I pretty much agree. I mean, I think good poetry is something that you meditate on and you really try to feel. And I think it's important to look at symbolism and, what the writer might have been thinking. Sometimes you get these poems, especially like on Instagram, and we read them and we think, oh, that's pretty. And then we just kind of scroll past and it's just gone. But when you're sitting reading a book and maybe you're relaxed or you're, by a nice stream or something, you can like take in nature and you can take in the meaning of the words. I think that's important too. I love going somewhere like beautiful and sitting and just reading poetry. And I feel like the surroundings really add to the whole experience and it makes it easier and it quiets your mind and it helps
mm,
you retain it more. So I think.
I love the idea of that. And I have to say, I do cringe at times when I see people posting poems in social media, and not because I think it's terrible to share poetry, because I think it's great. But I also think that there's a mindset going into social media and interactions that just doesn't it totally takes away that moment and that slowness and that meditative quality that you have when you do sit with a poem. And so Corinne, I wonder if you're writing and reading horror poetry, do you always go to a sweet little place by a creek or something, or do you go to a scary place like a cemetery?
Yeah, so and I love reading in the cemetery, and a lot of my ideas have come from the cemetery, but one of
Right
my
on.
favorite things to do is just kind of walk around at night in the shadows and just observe, and then I'll go home, I'll get an idea from, like, a weird shadow on a fence or something, and then that's a poem. It could be a poem. You look at the lights in some weird house, the attic lights on, what's going on in there, So that's what I like to do. I'll
That's
go to a
great.
place and I'll try to absorb it and then I'll take it home with me or vice versa. Read a book
You
in
get
that place.
you get to just sit inside the whole vibe and you're in control, so which is actually, I think, one of the things that makes a horror poem or any kind of horror interaction with a creative expression of horror so appealing, is that you can look at the darkness, but from a safe space, as we've talked about before. So, but I'd like to kind of roll it back a little bit. And we'll start with you, Corinne. I go to a lot of conventions, and StokerCon, of course, is coming up, and I do help sell a variety of horror books, including poetry. And sometimes I find that readers really need a little, I don't know, education about what a horror poem actually is. So, my question would be, how do you describe what a horror poem is or horror poetry is when you're facing a potential reader and trying to explain to them what a horror poem or horror poetry collection can be and what those parameters are that make it horror versus something else? What do you think?
I don't know. Maybe for me, I poetry is definitely like I said, it starts with a setting in a strange way. And I really just kind of like call back to certain writers. I really love like H.P. Lovecraft, for example, and he wrote a lot of poetry. And he has this one poem called Halloween in a Suburb. And it's so just textured and eerie and dreadful, but it's also kind of like fun. And it shows these really strange parts of him that you don't get from like one of his stories, like the Call of Cthulhu or something. And it's just I would tell somebody that a poetry collection dealing in horror is just it's more textured. It's more the inner workings of the poet. But for me, the way I write poetry, I like to write just about settings and I like to write about Halloween a lot and I'll just kind of go through the emotions of what it means to me to be trick or treating on Halloween night and nostalgia and, autumn, the way the wind moves and the leaves. It's just everything kind of coming all together to create something magical, but also something that could be a little eerie and uneasy. And yeah, I think that's what I would say.
No, that's great and relatable. I mean, and that's the big challenge we have as poets is making sure that we can reach our audiences. So, what do you think, Tiffany? You kind of brought this up before. What is a horror poem anyway? So, what would you tell someone who walks up to your table and says, "I don't even know that's a thing"?
Yeah, I think that it taps into a little bit of whenever I tell people about writing horror in general, where it's just for me, it's exercising what I'm scared of. Right? It's putting that on the page and doing it with a lot of vulnerability. And it doesn't necessarily mean that there's going to be, gore and all the trappings of what you think people who are newer to horror kind of associate with the genre. Um, Body horror is a huge thing for me. I write a lot of body horror, and I think the body is just a scary concept in general, right? We have very, very little control over this thing that we live inside every single day. Um, and sometimes it's just a lot easier to write about something that is that abstract and that weird in verse versus prose. So, I think a lot of it is just being vulnerable, but really focusing on, well, what are those things that actually frighten me down to my core? That's how I would pitch horror poetry to people.
Nice. The whole, right, what scares you, which is just,
Yeah.
at the very core of it all, right? And Jamal's nodding his head and agreeing.
No, I agree with Tiffany 1,000%. I think it's basically confronting what scares us, or another way of phrasing it, I guess, would be like confronting reality without rose tinted glasses. It's like just an emotional and impersonal exploration of reality in its rawest form, you know, A-
Mm,
and having the
yeah.
courage to do that. You know, other poems might color, like romantic poems. It's coloring reality in a sense. It's like having
Mm,
we look at the raw canvas and we look at that and we see what we see, as someone,
Yeah.
or we like, yo, we like, fuck all those paints, excuse my language. Look at this canvas. This is what it is. You know what I mean? That's kind of like you're gonna read poems that are kind of like that if you have the courage to pick up a horror poetry book. But I think you'll find your reflection on that canvas, I think, sometimes a lot more strikingly than any other form of poetry.
mm,
Well, I think one of the things that I feel strongly about with horror in general is that it's a form of truth telling. It dares to say that this is really what's happening, and maybe let's kind of pull the band-aid off or dig into the scab and show what's really going on. And, for some people, they don't like that. For many of us, it's like, yeah, finally, truth telling. It's honest. It's honest about the dark things, about grief, about loss, about abuse or trauma or war or all of these things that are all, let's say, call it what it is, part of the human experience, even if we don't want any of them to be. So it's kind of it's funny because I think of poetry as being almost like nonfiction, but then I also think that there's a story to poem. There can be a narrative to poems too. So I'm curious what you guys think about the differences between horror poems and horror fictions, short stories. They're both short, limited writings, but they have some big differences. So I don't know. What do you guys think about the differences between the prose, the fictional prose of a short story and the maybe not at all? I mean, it could be fictional. Poems can be fictional too, but I mean, what do you think about that?
I just want to tag on that question. I'm in a book club with nothing but power readers. They will suck down a 600-page book in a day and go back for
Wow.
seconds. They will not read a short story to save their
Mm,
lives. They fucking hate short stories. And
wow.
as a short story writer, it confounds and it pains me, But I know that some of these ardent readers also really like poetry. And it's interesting to me that short stories will often work with negative space and leave you wanting more and maybe ruminating on what's hinted at, what's unsaid. Whereas a poem that can be 10 times shorter than the shortest short story is somehow
Yeah.
a complete meal. And how do you
Yeah.
guys do that?
Mhm.
I'm in awe of you. So please, I want to know.
Yeah. Who wants to dive in? That's a great question, Jeff.
I mean, I'll jump in here. I don't think that there's a perfect answer to it, but I think some of it is word choice for sure. Like it's coming up with a concept and saying, okay, well, what are the words that are actually going to convey how this feels? I think that there's a sensory piece to it, where
Mm.
not to say that you can't have sensory things throughout short stories, and you absolutely should. They're not used enough. Um, but I think that poetry is really meant to just give you all of that very, very quickly, very intentionally, and it really is. It is a full meal, right? Because it is just crafted in that way with so much intention. Short stories feel like we can kind of meander a little bit, and that can be great and that can be fun, but it's not the same word surgery as
Oh,
as as you get in poetry.
okay. Okay. I love that because I'm a short story writer too, but there is a difference to me between a short story that's like 1,500 words and higher and a flash fiction, which can almost also be a prose poem if you're really into stylistics. That's a whole different animal. So,
Oh yeah.
and it is a full meal. I mean, absolutely, because there's no room to you only have room for those words, and you cannot there's no room for fluff is what I guess what I'm saying.
No,
I mean,
you don't have time. You don't have
it's like
time, the reader doesn't have
it's
time, you
yeah,
gotta get to it.
it's compression. Yeah, it's compression, and
Mhm.
it's also if you're doing it right and, really leaning in, it's all those sensory details. It's like a perfectly tuned bright sauce that you're cooking as a chef, and if it's just
Mm.
right yeah, I
Mhm.
mean, that's what I think of when I think of poetry, so, any who else has thoughts about the differences between I
Alright.
mean, in horror or in general, poetry and short stories?
I,
Yeah, what do you think, Jamal?
I would think bad short stories. I understand why they can just read a 600-page novel like that because it's like making slow love. You know what I mean? It's like slow love, right? But short stories could be a little bit like masturbatory, you know what I'm saying? Like for the writer in a lot of ways. You know what I mean? Well, and poetry to me is more like the feeling you have for the partner before you're even intimate with them. If that makes
Mm.
any sense. If that makes any sense.
Oh.
It's kind of like the difference in all the three mediums. I'm not saying that, hey, you might have a great session by yourself on the short story. You know what I'm saying? You might take care of yourself really well. I just find that a lot of times there's more space for vanity and short. It's more. It seems to be a
Mm.
little bit more up here than down
Yeah.
here.
Mm.
Short
Yeah.
stories. Long form fiction combines both. If you
Mhm.
have space to do that, and poetry
Mhm.
is mostly here.
Yeah.
Do have
Mhm.
here the really that's one is so much more here than it. So that's
Mhm.
what I think is kind of the difference in the different mediums and why some people might prefer that or why it feels like a whole meal because fundamentally like having to pay attention and most of the time you don't have to pay it and like poems can be exhausting. Like I think
Yeah.
you were saying tomorrow, like sometimes you read one and you have to take a break because
Mm.
the impact
Mhm.
that it has on you. You can't keep on going. You have to absorb what you read and then you go back and read it again and then you read it again. You look at certain stanzas and it's very exploratory in a sense.
Mhm.
It's like it's a discovery of self when you read a good poem. Short stories, a lot of times I'm very entertained at the end of it, but I don't like sometimes, some great short stories leave you like, oh shit. I feel like usually those short stories are like 4,000 to 6,000.
Mhm. Yeah.
thing. Those feel more full if they're in the range of like 4,000 to 6,000 words.
Mhm.
Outside of that, it's more like you're exploring the concept more than the character or what
Hmm.
ocean interests.
Yeah. So yeah, I agree. There's not really a plot necessarily in a poem, right?
Yeah.
I don't think so. Whereas the short story, once you read that story, you know the ending. And that's what you're reading for. And the discovery in the poem is, as Corinne was saying earlier, you go and you sit there and you read it and you read it again. You take it to a place and you sit with it and you meditate on it. I mean, wouldn't you say that, Corinne, that that's one of the biggest things that you can savor it many times?
Definitely, yeah. The thing is with poetry, I think maybe I think of it a little differently than you guys. Whereas poetry for me,
Hmm.
like growing up and stuff, having maybe a slightly tumultuous childhood or any kind of like bad thing that has ever happened, poetry has kind of always been like my place of solace. It's almost
Mm,
like crafting like a magic spell or something, or, something like that, where I can like write down the good things. And that's where my good stuff is. That's where I
mm,
can, toy with themes like melancholy or dread, but I don't really go full horror in my poetry. That's just me. I would rather write horror in short stories where I can get more into it and more, I guess, just delve in deeper to like the psychology of, being scared or being, in a funky situation. But for me, poetry is very like, that's like my golden happy place. And that's usually what my poems are. They're more, you know, nostalgic and I guess happy. But
well, and safety, and I mean, it comes back to safety, and
yeah,
it's funny
that's it.
because horror, people would never think of horror writing as safe at all, except that I would argue it's quite the opposite. It's the one safe place to work out all the things, all the things that are giving you dread, and
Definitely.
you
Definitely.
can do that, and you can do it in private, and no one has to, know about it,
Right.
and
No,
you can explore it.
I think I just like to like with poetry, I like to keep it I like to put the good things in. I don't know, that's just me. It's not
Hmm.
when I'm writing something like deeply upsetting, I feel like I need to just delve deeper into it and turn it into like a short story or like give it 1,000 words and explore more facets of it because sometimes when I'm upset about something, it may not be exactly the way I'm perceiving it. There may be other elements of it that I need to kind of like, undo. So, but for
Mhm.
poetry, poetry is like my life force. That's like my happiness. I'm going to put all of my happiness, all of my, weird little ideas into that. So that's just me though.
That's
I,
that's
I
amazing, though.
admire you
I
guys
mean,
for like the
no,
upside.
but
Like I admire that you can put all of that like fear into like a few little lines and like that's it. That's
no,
cool.
but what you do is also quite revolutionary. I mean, anytime you make art expressing yourself, especially in times when things are dark, it's really a revolutionary act. And it doesn't matter if it's dressed up in nostalgia or pretty colors or whatever. It's still a human experience that
Right.
you are working out for yourself, and you are the one that's in charge of that, and that is like the best thing ever in a climate where speaking out is being, threatened seriously. So good on you. I mean, I think that's amazing, and maybe more of us need to be doing poetry to work out our, even if no, that poetry never sees a light of day. Maybe that's, and I did have a question about that. I'd like to go. We're going to go to a little break here in a minute, but I'd like to think about poetry, horror poetry in particular, as therapy. Anybody else have any thoughts though about short stories and the difference between short stories and poems?
I don't think
Yeah.
so.
Okay. Now, Corinne and Jamal have already talked about poetry serving as a kind of therapy, writing as therapy, reading as therapy. So, I want to ask each of you individually how you approach poetry as horror writers. Do you mean it for it to be therapy at all? Or, and if so, is it just for you? Is it for your readers or is it both? What do you think? And we'll start with Tiffany on this one.
I think it's definitely both for me. I write from a place of extreme vulnerability, but I also write about experiences that I think are very universal. I write a lot of feminist horror and a lot of body horror, as I've mentioned before. And if you are a woman today or if you are femme presenting in any way, the horrors never end. And so I think that there's a lot that I have experienced that maybe I've exercised onto a page, but then people will read my work and it won't be the things that I think are going to hit in the same way, and they'll come back and say, "Hey, that poem, like I felt that way." So it's interesting because I think that I write it for myself, but I also write it knowing that I am not the only person who has experienced the same things that I have. So it winds up being a shared experience. Jamal was speaking to this a little bit earlier of just like it's a connection point. It's a way to work through some things that yes are deeply personal, but also can be extremely universal.
Corinne, what do you think about it? I mean, you definitely just spoke about that a little bit about the need to sort things through your writing of poetry. So, but do you also have this eye toward your audience as you're going, or do you, like Tiffany, maybe shape it later to make it more universal?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely write for me and my audience, but I am very much stuck in the past, and I'm not really sure why. I feel like I'm always kind of trying to go over things that I, went through in childhood or experiences and trying to, I guess, like unpack them
Hmm.
in a strange way. And I don't know if it's good to dwell there, but for me, like I said, I like to make my poems comforting. So
Mm, hmm.
I write a lot about Halloween and things like that, experiences having to do with growing up or, losing a relative and just those little moments when you're quiet and all by yourself and you're like, I really miss this person. This sucks. What do I remember about them? I remember the way they smelled. I remember, the things that we used to do, baking cookies with my grandma. So a lot of my poetry my past experiences will kind of end up there. And then people will read it and they'll be like, oh, yeah, I kind of did the same thing with this person or this reminds me of this. So it's just I think it's lovely to be able to connect with people through tragedy or, something that you might be afraid of. Yeah. So it's kind of my thing.
No,
Or
Definitely
or
nostalgic.
joy. Or joy in the sense of some of your poetry too, right? Like joy
Sure.
is definitely a connector as well, and I don't think that horror poetry needs to be devoid of it necessarily,
It is
mm,
joyful. The
either.
thing is, I think you can find joy in that sadness as well,
Yeah,
Absolutely.
So yeah.
absolutely.
mm,
And this is like
yeah.
it's a compassion. It's like the ultimate teacher
Right.
of compassion,
Yes.
sadness,
Right.
is grieving, grief.
Hmm.
Yes.
Mm.
Exactly. That's a
Hmm.
great way to say it.
It's
Yeah.
really it's interesting because what you describe, mulling over the things from the past is to me that is therapy.
Yeah.
And but it's looking at it straight on and trying to work it through. And I can't think of a more healthy way personally to work through a problem or work through a problem than through a creative act. I mean, personally, I think that's just makes perfect sense. It's productive. You get to access different parts of yourself that are above and beyond just your core emotions. And you get to name things, you get to own it. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Right.
So I
I
think
think I
there's
think I do that a lot. I'll take something like that, but then I'm like, how can I turn this into something whimsical or, something that might make somebody feel some sense of enchantment and some sense of comfort. So
Mm.
yeah, I feel like I'll take horrible things, but I'll make them not so bad in my poems.
yeah. No, 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 no. I think you're nailing it, and I think Jamal is nodding because Jamal also seeks to find the light in the darkness. So can you
Right.
talk a little bit more about that, Jamal?
So this is going to sound counterintuitive, but I definitely in my poetry, I like to explore things that I hate about society, about myself, the things that I hate that happened to me. I had a very hard childhood. I was extremely poor, homeless, abused in gangs, all types of crazy stuff. When I was younger, so I had a very intense childhood that I never really got the chance to make sense of. So, through all those different things, so being a black man in America, also just how human beings treat each other in like being like we're like stuck in this endless loop of stuff. I like to explore all those things and so I don't hate them anymore. It's almost so like even the things in myself, I explore the things that I hate in myself so I can find the compassion for myself so that I can love myself. And I feel like by putting the lens on that process in my writing, the reader can also go on that journey within themselves and they can learn to love themselves as well. They can explore that within themselves.
Mm.
Or in
Mm.
or within society or things that might upset them or things. I think one of the most fundamental things that's important and why I like to focus on my poetry is our relationship to pain as human beings and what we let pain make of us. Do we let ourselves become the pain or
Mm.
do we take the pain and courageously use it to heal others who's going through the same suffering? So
Oh, I love that.
that's that's kind of like what I'm trying to do in all my books. So when I say the simple way of saying that would be, I use darkness to show light. That would be like the paradoxical effect is kind of like what you're saying earlier about grief and sadness. And how sadness, like even this is gonna sound funny. I'll use Lord of the Rings as a reference, right? I know you guys ever read Lord of the Rings or
Of course.
the the similarity in it's kind of like it talks about how like before Gandalf became Gandalf the Grey or he came here he trained under basically their goddess of grief and that's where he learned compassion and that's
Mhm.
he has compassion because grief is the ultimate teacher of compassion or sadness and just like pain can be as well, it can be the ultimate teacher of courage and I feel like we only could be our best selves where we're being brave. And I think poetry
Mm.
helps be brave. So
Mm.
that's
Well, that reminds me, I took a workshop once from Thomas Glave, and I believe he's a poet as well as I think he writes prose too, but I think he's mostly a poet. And it was about monsters and the idea that if you stare enough at a monster, you can turn it into a human being. So, what you just described, Jamal, is looking at the thing you hate or are afraid of, or, which gives you dread and anxiety until you own it in a sense. And you say, okay, this is how I perceive you. And, in a former life, I used to work as a sleep technologist, and people would have anxiety when I was putting off to go to sleep so we could study their sleep while they were sleeping, right? And yeah, I mean, and so I would, the idea of anxiety, I would tell people if you have problems falling asleep at night, what you do, and this is like just like poetry, right? You write those things down on a piece of lined paper, right? And suddenly those lines in the paper are like bars in a jail, and all those anxieties you just wrote down, now they're in jail and now you can sleep. And so in a way you get to own those things that are, tearing you up as a human being. And again, the other part of that too is the idea of the monster. Um, and I would actually like to just lean into that a little bit. As a horror writers, we're gonna write about monsters, and monsters can be just about anything. So can you share, any of you, any monsters that you've written about and how you've approached them because there is a humanity behind everything, or maybe not?
I wrote about white folks. No, I'm joking. I'm joking. Not all white folks. I'm joking. I'm joking. No, I think
It's
for me,
fair. It's fair.
Yeah, I don't blame you at all, Jamal.
Yeah. No.
Just the short story writers.
just a short story, right? But no, I mean, there's so many horrors. Like Tiffany was saying about as a woman, like, the body and the autonomy of the body, what the body is, and all those things like that. I think a lot of times we write about things that other people define us with. A lot of times, but we don't feel like that's the self per se. So it's almost the warden of the prison of the self kind of deal. And you write about that monster, that warden that you deal with. My warden obviously has to do with a lot of times it's like social injustice, self-hatred, um, internalized external hatred into yourself. pain, abuse,
Mhm.
poverty, dehumanity, being dehumanized, things like that, because that's the warden of the prison of myself. You know what I'm saying? That I have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. So I used to have to deal with, per se, until I found the keys, which is poetry. So
There you go.
that's all I'll say.
Corinne, I think you've probably written about some monsters. So what do you think about
Um,
monsters in poetry?
so I think I mean everything that everybody what you guys just said about, confronting things. I feel like you also kind of have to like confront and maybe even forgive your monsters at a certain time. And that's really difficult to do. And
Yes.
for me, I've written a character who is this wicked witch, and she kind of takes over this town. She possesses people. She's killed like children. Um, but I don't really plan on forgiving her. She kind of just has like every negative, cruel thing I could imagine. She encapsulates all of that until her demise, which will be, something I'm going to be writing. But it's kind of fun to just put every negative thing into a certain character, give her no redeeming qualities. And I don't know what that says about me, but um, it's very cathartic. So, but yeah, I think
Nothing
a
wrong with
lot of us
that.
have to. I think a lot of us have to eventually, confront and maybe forgive, you know, horrible things that have happened to us or horrible people, and that's really difficult. And maybe one day we'll get there, but until then, I'm gonna write about a wicked witch. So
Well, Tiffany, you kind of brought up, feminist horrors, and the monster would be, of course, patriarchy. So, but, do share.
Ah, I have a love affair with writing about feminine monstrosity, in all of its shades and colors. Um, because I think that there are so many ways where women are painted as monstrous that are just it's straight up survival, y'all. So
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
think that there's a lot of women who have been painted in that way where it's people just don't understand it. So I've written a lot of things that kind of relate to that. In my collection, I've got a Medusa poem that's kind of a Medusa poem, but it's actually a breakup poem. Um,
Mm,
so because I think that she's a very misunderstood figure within
Hmm.
yeah.
mythology. So I love to write about feminine monstrosity in all of its forms because sometimes it is straight up, someone who chooses to be monstrous. Sometimes it really is just survival, it's instinct. Um, and actually, I have a poem coming out probably it's within the next month or so, that is about someone who submits to darkness. And it's a little sexy, but it's
mm,
also this monster going, "Hey, don't take my hand unless you wanna lose yours. Okay, you're coming closer. Let's have more of a conversation about this." So it's kind of fun to play with that idea of the monster, not necessarily as always the opposition either, but
Hmm.
giving them a little bit of that humanity too, and saying, okay, well, there's all kinds, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, I like to explore all of that and try to find a little bit of the humanity across. I feel like there's a Venn diagram with monstrosity and humanity, and I kind of right in the
Hmm.
center, I think.
No, that's really good. I just pings so many ideas for me. And it takes me, for instance, to like the final girl as a character who is a hero, right? But have you looked at a final girl? She's been through some things.
yeah.
And she would, if you just ran up, you were just, driving down a country road and you saw a final girl at the side of the road, how would you feel? You might think of her also as a monster because she'd be dripping blood. She'd have a weapon. She'd be, crazy eyes. I mean, how approachable is she going to be too? But she has
Well,
been turned
actually,
into,
Yes.
yeah.
I have I
She's
I have a story about that actually. It's
there
called When a
you go.
Motherfucker Just Won't Die. And it's generational trauma, and it's what happens
Yeah.
whenever you become a monster because of the things that have happened to you as well. Like,
Oh,
sometimes you are just thrust into that space.
yeah.
What happens when you can't escape it? So,
Yeah.
yeah, like, that's yeah, Final Girl. Yes.
Yeah. Final Girl, and to me, Final Girl, okay, that's another thing that, how your brain like leapfrogs to the next thing. To me, so many people have said, "Oh, but horror stories always have bad endings." But I think of a Final Girl story is not a bad ending because she lives. Yeah, she went to the basement and came back out, and she's alive. And we learned something about her and about the world. Okay, so that's kind of sickly hopeful.
Yeah,
So I would
it
like to, I would like to ask you guys, each of you, can there be hope? I know Jamal's going to say yes because his collection delves into the darkness to bring forth the light. I would like to talk a little bit more about that because I personally am a big fan of things like hope punk and solar punk and these ideas that we have to go and mine that underworld. We have to cross the river Styx. We've got to die a thousand deaths and then come back. Maybe to have that nirvana at the end of the road. So, um, do horror stories and poems, do horror poems have to be tragic or can they have that, little bit of light on the horizon that, there's got to be a morning after and we're going to make it. So what do you think about that? We're going to go ahead and start with Jamal because this is I know your baby, but we'll go from there, but I'm really curious to hear what you have to say because you are definitely doing what I think of as hope punk or solar punk, and I think that's just
That's so interesting.
you go.
It's interesting because I fundamentally um don't like hope. That sounds horrible.
Jamal.
That sounds horrible. I I like faith a little bit more than hope because I feel like
Yeah.
hope could be a demon
Yeah.
Mm,
when it's false. It can be like the worst
Yes.
rage of all. 'Cause it
Mhm.
it it can have you not deal with your circumstances in the real world, and it could keep you away from reality and confronting reality, which is, I feel like, the fundamental thing I'm trying to do when I'm writing anything is I'm trying to have the confront some aspect of reality as closely as and as rawly as possible, right?
Yeah.
I think, unfortunately, that, I've become soft in my older age and, I do have this burning light in my soul now, and it comes from my work, and I can't hide it. So I do think, and I like to use it to like faith. I believe like you can have faith in things unseen, and then get there
Mhm.
through that. I think that's a little bit more reliable than hope because it requires agency.
Mhm.
You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
A lot of times people just
Mhm.
hope that I do nothing and it's like, "Oh, it's just gonna happen," you know what I'm saying? So, I wanna kinda people on that horizon of hope, that's just the first stare, but I want you to kinda travel with your faith in a better future and in yourself. Find the faith in yourself and in other human beings. Despite all the terrible things we do to each other and all the terrible things you probably have done, find the faith that there's something bright inside you or in other human beings and move towards that. I guess with the moving towards that is where the hope comes in, right?
Yeah.
But that's basically. I don't know if that answers your question, but
No, it does. I mean, tragedy or comedy, right? Those are what we're working with. And the comedy would be like, oh, this terrible thing happened, but look, it's gonna be okay. I
yeah,
mean, and that's
and if it is not going to be okay for you, that doesn't mean that it's not going to be okay for others connected to you. I think one of the best things about horror is that it shows us even how to survive beyond death. Like even if we don't
mm,
survive, a lot of times it expands the definition of what you is, right? Because you are
mm,
not only the individual body, you're also the people whose lives you've affected, the people
mhm,
in you, the people you sacrifice yourself to save. So
mhm,
a lot of ways to the way that hope encapsulates you Uh,
Mhm.
I think it's broader than just the individual self, and I think
Absolutely.
we can see that in in poetry, and especially a lot of horror poetry. I never feel hopeless, very rarely, at the end of of dark poetry. I always feel like I either gain some new understanding, or I know what I need to confront, or I feel like this person confronted it for me, so I can follow their example. But
Mhm.
I appreciate the realness of it, and now that I know what it is, it's not so scary anymore.
Yeah. I think about, a poem being like a little lamplight, and the poet gives you this poem, and it's this light, and if you read it and really sit with it, they've basically given you a little spark that you can then get to carry with you because you've learned something from it. So that's the hope as well as the faith. I like the distinction that you make. So, Tiffany, what do you think about do all horror poems have to be tragic, or can they have that bright little spark of hope in them?
Yeah, no, I don't think that they have to be completely tragic either. Just continuing what you're saying here, like I love that analogy of like the light. It's almost like a poem is someone holding out their hand to you and saying, "Hey, take this. Like we're in this together." Right?
Mhm.
So even if we go somewhere super dark, you got someone who's there with you, right?
Yeah.
And maybe I can show you the way, maybe I can't. We got to figure it out together. Um,
Mm. Oh,
but
I
but
love
I
that.
but I think it's very much like that way. It's almost a poem is an invitation. Um, and if you accept it, then you've got someone who's there with you. And I also don't think that all horror poetry has to end quote unquote badly either. You could still go on a full journey of some stuff that's really really dark, but still at the end of that little meal of the poem find some light or find some reality or some hope or something that might ground you. um, so I think that it's full of all possibilities.
I think so too. I agree. Corinne, what do you have to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I feel the same. It's all possibilities at the end of a poem. And I think a poem like that can also, we're talking about confronting monsters and things like that, but a good one would also kind of make you take accountability for yourself, your own
Mm.
shittiness, and look and see what you could change, see what you can bring to the world. And, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, a horror poem could remind you of that we're all kind of, you know, walking that same path, and we're all imperfect, and we're all human and fallible, and doing
Right.
those, and everyone is capable of doing something horrible
Hmm.
because
Right.
humans are not angels. We are absolutely not. So this is really interesting. Let me look here. I'm going to turn it a little in a different thing, because a different direction here, because we have here um, panelists who are really working in all kinds of mediums. We have filmmakers, we have poets, we have prose writers, artists, podcasters, all of these things. So, is there something about working in poetry as well that leads to a more nimble and playful mind, or is it just the poetry, or is it a combination, or what do you guys think about that? Especially when you're talking about horror topics, which really you have to be creative about, because you've got to mine some dark matter, and then you've got to present it in a way that can be shared and accessed by the person who receives it. So, um, let's start with you.
Mm.
Me?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Uh,
so,
I don't know. Can you
is there
just
something
ask
about
again?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. If hold on, let me look at my notes here.
I think I
Is there
missed
something
something.
about working with poetry that leads to you having more of a creative and nimble mind
Um,
for all creativity?
I yeah, I think so. I don't know. I I'm not sure. I love like fantasy and folklore. I'm very into like folklore and fairy tales, and there's something. poetic about the fairy tales. It's all dealing in symbolism and stuff like that. So I think for me, poetry is like a place where I can really let my mind wander and just put, whatever I want. And I take like different inspirations from different stories or music or movies, and it all kind of just comes together in a poem. Or like I said before, I mean feelings, just feelings in certain time of the year or in a place. It all kind of just, coalesces in a poem. But what
Hmm.
exactly is the question? Like,
Well,
do you
it's
mean
just
like
really
does it make you more imaginative to write poems or
well, is there something about working in poetry that just gives you a more nimble or playful mind? And it seems to me, just from things you said earlier, that it does because you are nostalgic and you're trying to make something playful. So I guess that's what I was asking
oh,
is there
yeah.
something about the act of making poetry as opposed to painting a picture or photography or some other creative act, right? We can make all kinds of creative things, right? But what is
Right,
it about
definitely.
poetry?
And
Is there something about poetry?
for me, so okay, all right, poetry, I go back to trick or treating. When I was a little kid, I learned poems, and you'd go ring the doorbell and you'd have to recite your poem or sing your song. And that's kind of where it all sort of started for me. The first poem I ever learned was Walter de la Mare's The Ride by Nights up on their
Oh,
broomstick with the stream. So I would say that, and I think that's kind of where it came from. Just this wonderful thing is happening, and then I recite a poem and I get some candy, and it's just a great memory. So I think that
wow.
definitely yeah, I think that
You
definitely
did that?
adds to the dreaminess.
That's amazing to me because it's hard to get a kid to just say trick or treat anymore, much less recite a poem. That's
No, my
amazing.
my my grandmother would, like, make me learn poems, like, she would sit down and she'd be like, "You're gonna learn this, you're gonna say it on Halloween, you're gonna charm all of the neighbors, and, that's it."
Wow.
So,
That is super cool.
I was more of
yeah.
a trick or treat, smell my feet, give me
Mm,
something good to
Yeah,
eat.
it's still but it's
That's the
kind
still
of
one
a poet.
fun, Jeff.
I recall.
It's still fun. You gotta have fun.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, there's a sort of an aspect of whimsy to poetry writing too, because you are doing word play, even if it's a dark topic,
Right.
don't you think, Tiffany?
Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean I think part of it too is just that poetry can start with such brevity. Like poetry can start with a word.
Mm.
Maybe a word inspires you. Maybe a scent inspires you. And it's reacting to those kinds of things. I feel like there's an in the moment, like there's a presentness to it um, that I don't think you get in other writing. So I do think that it does make you kind of go, "Oh, wait, I got that little shock of inspiration. Okay, well, where is that going to lead?" Um, I think there's some whimsy just in getting inspired for poetry, and it's such an easy entry point. Like it doesn't have to be a fully fledged, I'm about to write a 600-page novel, and you have to know everything about it, right?
Mhm.
Um, there's a little bit of joy of discovery as you're writing poetry and you're working it out.
Mm,
And I think that, you do have to have a certain amount of playfulness with your own mind and acceptance of just, okay, well, here are the words and here they go. And just kind of following with that. So I think that there is a lot of play in writing poetry for sure,
yeah.
especially getting those initial words on the page. Like you might go back and edit, but I think the initial act of it is all
Mm,
play.
yeah. Yeah. I agree. I mean, for me, that's the only kind of writing that I will do with a pen and pad.
Yeah.
That I will never do write fiction using a pen and pad because everything is so analyzed and quantified when I've got strategies and plans and outlines, but a poem is
Mhm.
just like, hit me. Just hit me with whatever and I'll put it down and then I'll massage it in a document later. So
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
so and I think Jamal has already but tell us, I mean, as far as poetry goes, how does it because you also make films, right? And I'm curious about this because I've also made films and I found that I actually write poems. I rewrite my poems as I'm making the films for them because it's easier to rewrite the poem than it is to redo the film, if you will, from a more technical standpoint. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on poetry as an act of playful creativity.
Well, when the gingerbread man goes to the Dairy Queen, no, it's I am gonna hit you up with some philosophical dribble, but this is just my take on it, and I can never make anything simple. So I kind of feel like when you talk about poetry in general, poetry is not just writing on the page. And I'll explain. I think everything taken to its highest level becomes poetry,
Hmm.
like a dancer moving without mind, and kind of getting into that flow state. Everything becomes
Yeah.
poetry in that flow state, and in a sense, when we're talking about like Tiffany is saying having fun, or what you were saying about just kind of like writing with a pen, it's because you're getting into channeling. Like a lot of poetry is being an antenna for something bigger than yourself, and then channeling it through like your own experience and through the filter of your own experience, and then bleeding it out onto the page, right? And just having it flow out. And then after you do the first draft or the first written down, then the mind gets engaged when you go through it with the second pass. But fundamentally, I think that first pass is like an experience of channeling. It's a
Hmm.
the minor experience of transcendence. And that's the beauty
Hmm.
of it, is that you get to transcend yourself to find yourself, and then you share it with the world. That's why I think it's beautiful about poetry. And
That's awesome.
yeah,
Yeah,
see it.
it's so much fun. So we're gonna wrap this up, and I'm just gonna say that I'm always looking out for a knockout book of poetry. And so, who are some of your favorite contemporary horror poets? Is there a book collection or anthology from the recent past you feel everyone should read?
How
And
to
let's go
recognize,
start with you, Jamal.
how to recognize a demon from Linda Addison, of course. How to recognize a demon. William Leaves and Let His Skins, I believe, by Colleen Anderson. It's a
Okay.
grievously underread, underrated culture. It's phenomenal. Like especially like you would love it, Tiffany. Like for all the reasons, like the whole feminist monstrosity thing is. If I was like Rapunzel, through this whole, it's incredible. It's incredible. Um, and then I would say also Pedro, Mexicans on the Moon. Um, I
Yes.
mean, this is
So good.
it's
Yeah.
good. And then all the poetry books I've made. I've been a part of, which is technically only two. Like there's the Dark Between the Twilight and Everything Endless that I had great privilege of writing with the great Linda D. Addison.
Nice. Corinne.
Um, there's one that I read a few years ago that kind of relates to me talking about how I get lost in settings and it'll give me an idea for, a poem or a story. And it's called Ghost Ways,
Hmm.
Journeys in Unquiet Places. And it's written by
Oh.
three men. One of them I know is Dan Richards. They're kind of like travel nature writers, but they go to these places in England, like old ancient sites that were kind of used for, chemical weapons or
Mm.
just, forgotten places. And they're very eerie,
Mm.
desolate places. And it's just, I don't know, the prose and the poetry is just absolutely beautiful the way that they describe them. Um, and yeah, it just really gets you into this strange setting. You almost kind of feel uncomfortable because it's so heavy with grief and the past,
Mm.
and it's just these places by a lonely shore or in the woods. So
Mm.
that's definitely one that I would recommend.
Oh, nice. And Tiffany, what about you?
Oh my goodness, I have so many.
Yeah.
Uh, but people, I've got to give a shout out to Grace Reynolds. She writes some really incredible stuff. There was a small chapbook called Midnight Blue that's about chronic illness. That was
Mm.
incredible. The
Mhm.
lie, the lies we weave, and Lady of the House are also hers. Like incredible. Jamal already gave a shout out, obviously, to Linda D. Addison, who is just like grandmaster.
Yeah.
Like anything by her is absolutely incredible.
Mhm.
There's a fantastic collection called Can You Sign My Tentacle by Brandon O'Brien, which is just like, I mean, completely blew my mind. Absolutely excellent. It mixes Cthulhu with like contemporary celebrity with hip hop. Like it's just wild.
Mm.
It is so incredibly good. Anything by Sarah Tantlinger. Cradleland of the Parasites is what kind of got me into like, oh, there's this thing called horror poetry that we can do. Amazing. And then my last one, just because we were talking about final girls, is I Am Not Your Final Girl by Claire
Mhm.
Holland.
Yeah.
Just such an incredible exploration of just, yeah, the emotional states of all of the final girls that we all know and love.
Oh, I would only just add, a dear friend of mine, Janine Hall Gailey. She writes very
Mhm.
dark speculative poems about all kinds of creepy things, and anything you pick up from her is gonna be more than satisfying. So I think that's a wrap. So I'd like to just go around and ask everyone one more time to for each of you to tell us where we can find you, what you have out, and et cetera, et cetera. So let's go ahead and start with you, Tiffany.
Actually, Tamara, can I jump in with a few recommendations?
Oh yes, please do.
I have to recommend The Dark Between the Twilight by Jamal Hodge.
Of course.
And of course, In Vast Spaces of Night and The October Book by
Mm,
Corinne Phillips.
there you go.
And How
Ooh,
Lovely to Be a Woman by Tiffany Michelle Brown.
Excellent.
Yay.
All right, thank you, Jeff.
Thank you.
Tiffany,
yeah.
what are you up to the next? What do you have anything coming out?
Oh goodness. Yeah, so I do have that poem coming out that I alluded to a little bit of someone kind of surrendering to the darkness. That one should be coming out within the next month or so. I will be at StokerCon, so if you are at StokerCon, come and find me.
Woo!
I would love to see you. And I'm always doing new episodes of my podcast with my best friend. It's called Horror in the Margins. You can find all of our episodes wherever you find your podcasts or at horrorinthemargins.com. And you can find me. I haunt basically all the social media platforms. And my website is tmbwrites.com.
Nice. Thanks, Tiffany. Corinne, where can we find you, and what's going on with you? Do you have any books coming out, or
I'm
poems?
currently working on I'm currently working on a book of 31 Halloween meditations. And
Nice.
it's basically just like a prose style, book of meditations where I take a subject like a mummy or something and I write what it feels like to be a mummy on Halloween. Um, so there's that, and then I'm working on an autumn poetry book that I hope
Nice.
to finish soon, where it's just solely autumn themed. And you can find me at my Instagram. It's obscura underscore Hortus, Hortus, and all of my links are in my bio.
Perfect. And Jamal.
Hey, so I'm working on a few things. Actually, I have a book coming out in July, a new collection called "I'm Not a Good Person, I'm a New Yorker." And everyone is
Stop it. I love that.
yeah, so it's coming out, and it's about it's about really growing up in New York and how the city is like a monster, and how I have this abusive relationship with the city, and I can't leave her, but she just abuses the hell out of me. And everyone else, she's so gorgeous, especially at night. But then there's also I have a big anthology coming out called Shards of Gotham, which is also about New York, but it's about New York history and events told from a speculative lens.
Nice.
By some of the top horror writers in the world. I mean, we got Paul Tremblay, Jonathan
Mm,
Majors, we got
nice.
Cherie Renee Thomas, Linda Addison. We got like, Tananarive Due. We have like
Ooh,
six. We have six New York Times bestsellers and like over 10 Bram Stoker winners in the book.
Nice.
So
Wow.
it's a big book from Rudon Press. It'll be coming out next summer. And then I have another anthology that I can't say that I'm working with James Chambers that's going to be announced in December. That's coming out the year after that. And then I have a new collection that's coming out the following year. That's me, Christina Singh, Michael Bailey, and of course Cynthia Paleo,
Oh, yay.
working together, showing epochs of time when if humanity, what happens when humanity no longer has a human future if we trade our human spirit for convenience, which is a big question
Mm,
going on right
Mm.
now. And
yeah.
different epochs of time told through poetry, this poetic epic. So,
Wow.
that
That's
type,
amazing.
yeah.
That's all. So many things.
And
That's amazing.
my website is writerhodge.com. That's writer and then my last name Hodge, HODGE.com. And I will definitely be at StokerCon because I'm nominated again. So
Yay.
hopefully I have a shot this time. Pedro's ads have been writing. He's getting slow, so maybe I got a chance.
Well,
That's all
good luck to you. Good luck.
I did. Yeah.
Let's get Jeff in here too. Where are you going to be at and what are you up to?
You can find me on Instagram at jeffc.carter, my website, jeffccarter.com, and you guys can all find me at the bar at StokerCon. Let's get together. Let's have a drink.
Hell yeah.
Sounds like fun.
Take you up
Always
on
good. He might have his mic out to interview you too. Just be prepared. You never know.
I mean, I probably will too, so it'll just be a battle of the mics, Jeff.
Just
It'll
a
be great.
horrible
And Clay too.
squealing feedback as we dual
I know,
dual
yes.
mics. Yeah.
It'll be amazing.
You can
Well,
come
I've
join
been
us on Radio Row, Tiffany. We're trying to get a Radio Row going at Stoker.
there you go.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Let's go.
Well, I'm gonna miss it this year, but I've been Tamara K. Sellman. You can find me. My tagline everywhere is rhymes with camera. And I have a Substack and a blog and a website, and you can find me under that for most of the social media that I'm at. I do have a new book coming out called Trust Fall. It is a dark feminist fairy tale coming of age story about based pretty much on my childhood being raised as a girl in a John Birch Society household in the 1970s. So that's a different kind of horror. I wouldn't call it horror technically, but it's definitely got its dark moments. So that's coming out by Gnashing Teeth Publishing this September. And then, of course, I'm doing Beneath Rain Shadows podcast with Clay Vermolm. Thank you so much for coming, you guys. This has been a great conversation, and I hope that we have been able to inspire more people to read and appreciate horror poetry more now that we've had a little chat about it. Back to you, Clay.
Absolutely. And I have not really been in this episode Clay Vermolum, but I remain Clay Vermolum all the same. I host the Fermented Fiction podcast. You can find us doing episodes every single week. Tomorrow we're with another Bram Stoker nominated friend of ours, Nina Viel, who's nominated for her Listen to Your Sister, her debut novel. So we're gonna be debating Leslie Vernon Behind the Mask. So that will be
Hmm.
really fun. If you don't know how fermented fiction works, we roll 2d20s. If you roll high, you have to debate for the thing. If you roll low, you debate against it, no matter what you actually think. It's a lot of fun. And then we also get drunk and have a panel about it afterwards. So if that sounds like your cup of tea, come join us tomorrow for Nina VL around 5:30 p.m. PST. Otherwise, this episode will be out in the near future. I'll be at StokerCon with my whole team and Jeff. We rented our own little conference room. And we're doing a little Radio Row action. So if
Awesome.
any of y'all
Nice.
or any fans of either of our shows wants to come by and say hello and you happen to be in the area or you want to come answer some silly pull a question out of the hat type questions, we'd love to see y'all again. We'll be there at StokerCon. Thank you so much for tuning in to Fermented Fiction and We Bleed Orange and Black's crossover episode of
Woo.
poetry, Superior Achievement Awards and paneling. Thank you all. We'll see you next time on either one of our shows.
Bye, guys. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks for listening. Links are in the show notes. Please subscribe and follow. You can find me at jeffccarter.com and pick up my collection, We Bleed Orange and Black, 31 fun-sized tales for Halloween. Until next time, stay spooktacular.